Hi, this is Jason Lisk with PoolGenius here with round 2 of NFL Playoff Survivor. We are in the divisional round in this episode, which will be our final video for the playoff season, because by next week, everybody will be fairly pot committed in how they have to pick it out. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to have a couple options. Maybe you'll have one way to play it. So those decisions are a little more specific to whatever people have left. Feel free to jump in the comments, jump into our Discord, where if you are a subscriber, you'll also be able to see our article next week breaking down the odds and some of the choices. But you can also jump into our Discord, ask questions, engage with the community, and I can jump in there and answer specific questions as well as we get past this round. But let's recap what we saw and how we got to this week in NFL Survivor pools. Last week, the Rams were probably the most popular in most pools. They were the biggest favorite. Eagles were the second biggest favorite, had some popularity, as did the Patriots, the Texans, and then we saw some picks on the other teams. And so the Rams survived. The Eagles did not. And so the Eagles took out probably the biggest eliminator last week in a lot of pools. The Texans did get through in what was a pretty key game for people. Very important. We'll talk about path odds coming up. Last week when we talked about the paths through the playoffs, one of the things that came up was that the Houston-Pittsburgh winner puts you on the best. If you could pick the winner of that game, it puts you on the best path long-term overall to get an entry through and survive the playoff season. And Houston was the winner of that game, and we'll get to the paths, but that Houston path is looking like a decent one to be on right now. The other big game that eliminated some people was Green Bay. I know in some pools, Green Bay's popularity shot up, particularly in multiple pick pools and pools where people are looking to find that path. The Packers would have set you up as the 7th seed had they won, playing at Seattle on a pretty good path as well. And unfortunately, they blew that lead 21-3. Could not put away the Bears yet again. Never trailed till the end, but Chicago wins. Green Bay loses. That was another big one. You probably saw different elimination rates depending on your pool, right? If you were in a pick one pool, well, the Rams got through, the Patriots, the Texans. Only the Eagles were the primary loss there. And so probably the majority of entries got through in a single pick. Double pick, a different story because of having to take on those risks, navigate more difficult paths by having multiple picks in play. A lot more people had to come off and take one of those toss-up games. Packers got some people, Steelers going against the Texans, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot more losses in those multiple pick pools. And so you're probably seeing those numbers down a bit more. But before we get to breaking down the rest of the divisional round, now that we've talked about what happened last week, let's hear why Survivor players should consider golf one-and-done pools. You may not know it yet, but you have a hidden talent. If you play in NFL Survivor pools, you already have an edge in golf one-and-done pools, even if you've never watched golf in your life. Both contests reward a lot of the same skills: expected value, swerving from the crowd, and knowing exactly when to fire your best play as you plan out your season. It's not about 1 week's decision, it's about leverage and value over the life of the contest. The PoolGenius One and Done product does the work for you with pick grades, golfer rankings, ownership rankings, course stats, and season-long planning. So stop the guessing. Start playing with an edge. Golf one and done pools start up in January of 2026. So go to poolgenius.com/golf. Don't miss the cut. Okay, now let's dive back into the divisional round and what you're probably facing in Survivor pools. I'm going to pull up a graphic with my estimates for pick popularity for this round in Survivor. Obviously, every pool is a little different. We saw some wild swings. It's a lot more wild than a regular season Survivor in terms of trying to predict how any particular group is going to pick. But overall, we're again seeing Seattle in early data be the most popular pick. I think because of the dynamics of who people have picked and the types of pools, you could again see that pretty widely vary. Like they could be really popular in some, they could have that popularity limited in others, like because San Francisco wasn't that popular a pick last week. So if you're picking directly against the team you picked, in most cases, you wouldn't be picking Seattle, right? You almost certainly advanced by picking someone other than San Francisco for most of you last week. And so it's not natural to end up on Seattle. That said, there are people that play in pools where you can repick. That's part of this data. There's also people that are just going to play it poorly. And if you are an advantage player, this probably broke pretty well for you to have some leverage late in the contest, because the Rams being the biggest favorite last week, Seattle being the biggest favorite this week, any entry that needs to get through with a Super Bowl pick that started Rams and then goes to Seattle is going to be drawing dead if anybody in that pool gets to the end and has a Super Bowl pick. And that's because if you pick the Rams and now you're on Seattle and your Seattle pick has to win, and if the Rams do beat the Bears, well, you've used both NFC teams. You have to switch to the AFC to make a pick in the championship round, and you would have no Super Bowl pick even if you got that AFC game correct. And so do not pick the Rams and Seahawks in consecutive weeks. That is bad strategy. And look for others and hope others do, because they will be drawing dead in most cases. So, number one, Seattle popularity. 2, we're seeing it on New England. Now, if you remember, New England and Houston both had popularity last week. Houston got through, so some of this is natural. Like the Houston pickers on what we had identified as the highest path odds path was to start with Houston. They would naturally then pick New England next. And so there's a natural inclination here, and that's why New England in most data is showing up here as more popular than the Rams. Rams were already used heavily. Patriots were used less than the Rams typically. And Houston was used some. So it would be natural to then go from picking Houston to picking New England. We see the Rams down there in the third position, just above several others. The Rams are going to have a high EV if they're that low owned in a particular pool. That said, you can make an argument for staying off using the Rams if you have a choice to do so, because they do present also good odds to win and reach the Super Bowl. Then we get into a lot of the other picks. You're going to see picks on some of those teams in plenty of pools where people have to play it out, different variations. People will be picking Houston as the underdog. They'll be picking the Bears as the underdog and making some picks on that Buffalo-Denver game. The one I think is likely not to have that many picks is San Francisco. And that's because Seattle didn't play last week, so it's not like you can pick directly against a pick by going San Francisco. So you'd have to choose to have made a different pick and then switch to picking the biggest underdog this week. Take some huevos to do that. And I don't think many people will. So I've got them as the least popular estimated pick in the divisional round. So let's go through some different pool types real quick and what you might think about. If you're in the end game, I referenced this earlier, but if you're in the end game, it's very contest specific. And by end game, I mean like there's less than 10 people left. Maybe it's a pool that extended from the regular season. A lot of teams have been used. Choices are limited, that kind of thing. If you're a subscriber, absolutely read our article next week, but also jump into the Discord, ask questions. We want to see you get those pool wins. Jump in there and ask us if you have questions about strategy, about how to play that out and who to pick, because general dynamics don't apply when you're in the end game. Like if you're the only one that has a team available, you've got to consider picking them. If you know a big chunk of the pool is going to be on another team, you may want to stay off of them, for example. And so you got to think about those things, what people's options are. If you know other entries are dead, if it gets to the Super Bowl, plan on winning if it requires that kind of thing. So jump in with your questions there on those kind of pools. Now, if you're in a pool where you can reuse picks, meaning You get to pick fresh each week. It's not a true survivor pool in the sense that you lose the ability to pick certain teams. You're just picking and surviving each week in the playoffs. You got to think about it differently, but I would expect Seattle's going to be very popular, and then New England and the Rams are going to eat up most of the picks. So nearly all the picks are going to be on those three. I think Seattle could be over 50%. I would say if you are in a large pool, it's kind of like the Thanksgiving thing, right? In Circa Survivor, where we saw picking underdogs was viable, in some cases a really good strategy. I don't know that it's like an amazing play, but I do think that if I'm in a really large pool, picking in one of those underdogs against one of the big favorites is certainly a viable and unique path option if you're willing to take that risk. And you're playing in a short-term survivor pool. The playoffs are risky, so you got to think about it. Now, this is if it's a really large pool. If you're well over 100 people left, I don't want to do that in a small pool where my pick makes up a higher percentage of the total pick popularity number, and where any one decision by any other individual in that pool could sink my value. Because if you're going to do that in a small pool, you need to be the solo picker on an underdog. You are trying to set up a situation where a couple upsets happen, the pool gets wiped out, and there you are standing in the wreckage. So you don't want to do that in cases where others are joining you and robbing you of that highest upside. And so I'm looking to do that in really large pools. I would generally say Seattle's going to be the most popular. I don't know that there's a huge EV edge because of that on them versus the Rams versus the Patriots. What I think is the worst strategy if you have multiple picks is to spread it across those three teams. I think you would be better off picking and concentrating on one and diversifying to some of the other underdogs or toss-up plays like Buffalo, Denver, and staying off of all, so you're not on all three of the most popular picks. You have to have somewhere to benefit and not follow the crowd. So that would be my general advice in those pools. Now, turning to the ones where you do have to pick a team and then can't use them again. Whether you are in the splash pool that has had 2 picks last round and this round, or you're in a 1 pick each round, or maybe 2 last time, 1 now, you've got to strongly think about picking against the team you just picked. And the reason you do that is to keep your other options open and not need more specific outcomes to hit in order to win the pool. And by that, I mean, like if I can not make a pick on that Buffalo Denver game by picking Houston last week and now New England, well, it doesn't matter to me who wins that game. I'm through if my pick wins now, and I have a pick next week, and I will pick whichever one of those teams wins. So I have better odds of hitting that path than if I needed Buffalo to specifically to win, or Denver specifically to win, in order to win my pool, in order to get to the Super Bowl. And so that's the advantage of staying on the paths you started. That said, there are options and possibilities to jump and switch paths. We're going to pull up the path analysis graphic here. This shows you the wild card pick you made, the division pick you would make to stay on that path, and then the win odds this round combined with the overall path odds to go all the way to a Super Bowl win and getting a chop or winning the pool. The best path, we identified it last week, was going to be either Houston or Pittsburgh. Houston won. Houston is the best path by a fairly decent margin over everybody else, 18.1% chance if you're making single picks to go Houston, New England, then pick the Buffalo Denver winner to win the AFC, and then to have the NFC champion as your Super Bowl pick. And so that's the best path by just simply path odds. Next is Buffalo last week, Denver now, Chicago last week, Rams now, and then after that, it's a path that didn't exist last week, which is Buffalo now, but that 13.6 number is not the true number because you would have had to have made a pick somewhere else. And so you would have to have some risk of catching that team later on in the playoffs and thus having lower than a 13.6 chance if you pick Buffalo. That said, it could be a viable strategy to think about. And then at the bottom half, we see San Francisco first and then Seattle. And then we see the two of the more popular picks to get through. So this would be where most people would be if they played it out. Rams to Chicago, New England to Houston, which would put them on the underdog, which is kind of what our path analysis last week was about. We can have this debate. What pick should I make in a survivor pool? You don't typically win a playoff survivor pool in the wildcard round. You can get eliminated, certainly, but in most cases, in a really large pool, you're not winning it. And you're going to take risk somewhere. And you're going to take risk every round. It's a question of what kind of risk and how much in each round. If you take the biggest favorite right away, yeah, it feels comfortable. But you're probably, if they win, on a dog the next week. If you pick a toss-up or an outright dog and they win, you are on a much better path through the playoffs for the rest of it. So you took more risk early. You allocated your risk early in the process. But if you get through, you're in better shape. There's also the risk of not having a pick. So you're balancing all those things. So you'll notice that the Rams are down near the bottom. And the Rams were one of the most popular picks. So the path to pick Chicago is not particularly like a high value path now. That said, switching has a cost. And so, and the one benefit, we know people aren't doing this. We looked at my popularity estimates. If everybody who picked the Rams last week was picking the Bears this week, the Bears would be super popular. We are not seeing that. And so we know most people are switching. So actually picking the Bears is a low probability path, but probably a decent leverage path if it does hit. Because the same thing we just talked about. If the Bears do win and beat the Rams and upset the Rams at home, well, then you're set up with probably a bigger favorite in the next round and having different ways to play it out and being on a less used path that is good after this round. And that's kind of what we see. That Rams numbers, or that Bears number, Rams path to Bears, is down because of this low win odds this round. And this is what you have to debate with all these. Houston, New England is a semi-popular path. Houston was not as popular as the Rams, but they're popular. Now, if people join you on that path who have risk of, let's say they pick the Rams and they switch to New England, well, if you were a Houston, New England picker, you do have an edge over them. If the Super Bowl ends up with the Rams in the Super Bowl, they're done. You're not. And so you're in a better shape than some people that may join you. And that's the other advantage of not switching. So review all those path odds. The general advice is stay on your path. That said, if your path odds are so low and switching makes sense, you can do so. The better switches, and I detailed this in our written article, are probably from switching from the NFC side to the AFC this week. And that's because you typically will pick up a little more risk this week, but better path odds through the playoffs. You would be on more of a toss-up in the championship game and then have probably the favorite in the Super Bowl. I would project right now the Rams or Seahawks would be favored over every team on the AFC side. The one exception, again, might be Buffalo if they make that run. But I think they would be favored over the other three and probably Buffalo as well in the Super Bowl, and potentially by more than a field goal, depending on how the playoffs played out. And so that's why our path logic, and when we look at switch options, and when I say switch, I mean I picked an NFC team. If I'm going to pick a team, not against the team I just picked, I need to switch conferences. You can't do Rams Seattle. You have to do Rams and somebody from the New England Houston game or somebody from the Buffalo Denver game. That's the way you do it. Going to New England's the higher odds switch on path odds, but slightly more popular. Going to the Buffalo Denver is the path less traveled. Very few people have picked Buffalo or Denver at this point in the contest, and will have. And what does that mean? It means that probably the winner of that game is going to be fairly popular next round. So getting on the opposite of having to pick Buffalo or Denver next round could be a leverage spot in contests like this, especially a large one, even if the raw percentage isn't as high. So those are all things to hopefully think about. I want to close the show by talking about some game theory things, the splash contest, touch on that, and also some questions that came up in our Discord. On the splash contest, it's harder to switch paths when you have two teams that you've already picked, one from the AFC and one from the NFC, and then you need to pick two more. Because not only do you have to, like, there's no way you can not pick against at least one of your previous picks. Like, you would have all four games in play otherwise. And that would be bad. That would be bad. You'd be very much at risk of not having picks. So my general advice in Splash is you really need to think hard about picking against the two teams that advanced you to this point. Rare exceptions, like could I have picked the Bears? And so I'm supposed to pick the Rams. Could I switch and pick Seattle now? In that specific situation, I guess you're hoping the Rams still win, and then you want to pick the Rams to the Super Bowl, right? That would be or hold them for the Super Bowl winner. That would be the one kind of path you're playing to. It just becomes a more narrow path. But the main reasons I would not play directly against two is if you think you're getting a leverage spot, if you're playing directly against popularity, or you're making a pick with a strategic goal based on your specific pool and what's left, that it could get wiped out. And by making that move, you're kind of pushing your chips in on a different way of playing it. But generally speaking, I would pick against the team I had just picked in Splash and just try to play out as best I can. Now, a question came up, because this does come up in Playoff Survivor. If you're playing multiple entries, do you pick against yourself? One person asked about a situation where they had picked successfully with Houston and the Patriots last week. And those two weren't automatically going to play each other, right? The Bills winning at Jacksonville dictated that matchup. But if Jacksonville had won, Houston would be in Denver right now, and New England would be hosting Jacksonville. And so you'd have two picks on opposite sides of the AFC in that case. Didn't work out that way. They're playing each other. So the question is, do I just pick against myself, pick one on one entry, one on the other, or do I switch one of them to the NFC? And it's an interesting and fascinating question. And I don't know that there's a clear answer, but I'll just talk through it. I don't think you should, I would never in a regular season Survivor pick against myself. I know some people do. It's hard. You're usually on 70-something% teams. Picking against yourself just gets you eliminated. You got to get through with entries. Playoffs are different. I mean, as you sit looking at something on week 5 of the regular season, there are thousands of ways the season could play out that your pick entries could go. There are really only not that many different combinations of outcomes now at this point. And so I don't think it's the craziest thing to pick against yourself in even the divisional round, if it works out that way. And I'll tell you why. The Houston path, as we saw, is the best path forward by advancement odds. The New England path is lower, but a lot of that's because you're on the dog this round, right? After this round, they're a lot more similar. They're a lot closer to each other. So if you pick both of them, yes, you eliminate an entry. You also guarantee you are through to the conference finals, where there are really only a handful of outcomes that could go. And you are set up perfectly in terms of cleanness of your options, where it doesn't matter what happened in any other game. You pick those two, you advance one entry, you have the Buffalo-Denver team available to pick, and you have the NFC side available to pick in the Super Bowl. And you just need those outcomes, whichever teams are involved, to hit. Those are according to our numbers, about a 29% chance that that path hits if you get an entry to the conference championships. 29%. If I split it, let's say I stay with New England, but I switch over to Seattle or the Rams on the other side because I don't want to pick against myself, I need a lot more things to happen. I need New England to win to advance this entry. I don't necessarily need New England on the other entry. In fact, I want them to lose at some point. So if they lose in the divisional round, that's fine on the other entry, but it hurts obviously the one I diversified from. So I need New England to win. I need the team I switched to win. I then need New England to lose before the Super Bowl, no matter what, for that second entry. I then need that second entry to have the team I didn't pick win the NFC Championship game. So if I picked Seattle, now I need the Rams or Bears to beat them. And then I need the Super Bowl to not involve New England Patriots. And so when you add all that stuff up, there's about a 26 or 27% chance that one of those two entries would successfully get to the end by splitting across the two conferences with that New England factor lurking. So that's actually that's an argument for staying, or at least it's neutral. Now, you could make the decision to switch. I think you do so because you might be like, I think this New England path could be popular. I could split with more people. So I have a 29% chance, but it's going to be with more people. And if you think that, then you may want to split. You may want to explore different options and have another possibility out there. But I don't think you want to just automatically avoid picking against yourself. If you're playing multiple entries right now, you're going to get to a point where that's going to happen. If not this round, probably the next. And certainly if you have two alive, that's a great place to be for the Super Bowl. So don't rule it out. Think through the various scenarios and why you would either choose to stay or split. And like I said, the choose to stay method keeps you on a very clean path and makes your odds pretty good. And so that would be the argument to actually just sacrifice an entry to advance the other. So anyway, those are some strategy thoughts that came up in our Discord. That's an example of the things we can talk about in Discord and other people can weigh in on. So if you have strategy questions, drop them in our comments here. But also, if you still have stuff, check out our Discord. Drop it into the NFL Survivor channel. Talk about it. Ask your questions. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. This is our final NFL Survivor video for the year, but I promise you there will be other Survivor content. We also are doing a weekly one and done show talking about the golf pools, and we will be having college basketball content, including March Madness survivors in the future, very similar to NFL playoff survivors. So if you enjoyed this format, you may want to be checking out NCAA tournament survivor pools because a lot of the same concepts apply. Good luck in your NFL playoff picks. Again, hit that like and subscribe, and we'd love to hear from you.